Is there anything else you would like CEOs or business leaders to know?
Well, there's a really interesting concept of time. So when you're in the money business, we've all heard the expression, the time value of money. And the idea is that we give an interest rate to money, right? We put money in the bank, we expect a rate of return. Or we invest in a company and we expect a higher rate of return. And so what are those rates of return? If we expect that our business is going to grow and we want to return to shareholders, is it we want to return 2% to shareholders, or is it 22% to shareholders? You hear all the time, oh, I want double-digit rates of return, or I want 20-plus rates of return. So think about that for a moment. We call it interest, but another way of looking at it is that it's a discount rate, and that the way to try to illustrate this is to say, if I offered you $100 today or $100 a year from now, which would you take? Well, you take $100 today because there is a rate of return I would expect in 100 years. So we're putting it differently. If I offered you $100 in a year or $90 today, then you would say, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I've just gotten 11% interest. That's a high interest rate. I'll let you keep that money for a year. So just sort of generalizing from that, if I offered you $1,000 today or $5 million in 100 years, which would you take? $1,000 today, $5 million in 100 years. There's no credit risk on this $5 million. It's going to be U.S. Treasury bonds. So unless you think our country is going to crash, the $5 million will be there in 100 years. And when I ask that question, overwhelmingly people take the $1,000 today. Because why? I'm not around in 100 years. So first of all, there's not a concept of what's going to happen in 100 years. So for example, yeah, but your kids are around, your grandkids are around. Wouldn't it be nice if they had $5 million? So it's not lost. But we have a hard time thinking 100 years out. And in a way, what we're saying is $5 million in 100 years is not even worth, it's not even worth $1,000 to you today. I just assume take the $1,000 and forget about that 100-year outlook. So that's how we run our businesses. And we can't plan for the future for the long run. We can't make investments that pay off in 100 years. It's too far out there, even though the payoff may be $5 million, which by the way is almost 9% a year compounded return for 100 years, which is extraordinary return. But we can't relate to that. And so just to sort of drive that home, I hope, if I were to ask you what's the value of the lives of your grandchildren or great-grandchildren in 100 years, most people will say, oh, it's priceless. The value of my grandchildren is priceless. But yet you just told me you wouldn't take $5 million in 100 years. So really, the present value of priceless is nothing. Your grandchildren really don't have a seat at the table today. They're really, the future has no seat at the table today. It's discounted so much. That future value of $5 million or grandchildren really has very little present value today, so it doesn't show up in our decision making. And that's how we run our businesses. And that's how our economy rewards us, is by looking for high rates of return, which discount off the future and don't give it a seat at the table.
Wow, that's a profound point.
So telling businesses that, how do you respect the future? How do you value the future? Is there a legacy in your business that is greater than financial? That's a question.
That's a very, very profound point. What in the system do you think we need to change?
Well, the definition of success, for one thing, has to be more than just economic. As long as everything is boiled down to the marketplace and a financial rate of return, that's a problem. And I think that financial rates of return are too high. People expect too much. So when interest rates are low at 1%, while people grumble on the deposit side, that is probably a better interest rate for the economy in the long run. And by the way, that's not great for banks. Banks like higher interest rates. But if interest rates are kept lower, then the future has more present value. To the extent interest rates are high, you want 20% return every year or 15% return every year, the future really has very little present value. So that is one of the drivers of economic behavior, is that concept of interest rates and rate of return. They fundamentally need to be lower, because what we're doing by getting that high rate of return on money is we're getting a negative rate of return on planet and people. And so if you don't see that, then you just push for that one rate of return.
Yeah.
At this point, I think a lot of this is consciousness building, that life is more than your rate of return, and that being well is really what we ought to strive for. And then as we are being well in terms of ourselves and the community we live in and the planet, then we can go work in the marketplace and not be defined by the marketplace. We can use the marketplace and not be used by the marketplace. So I think that's where we need to go.